Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, this is Brenda J. The following safety plan is loaded with important information. Since we have listeners from all over the world, we'd like to provide information on how to access domestic violence resources in other countries. Sarah McDougall has a free app that is safer than going to a website because it does not leave a browser trail. It includes verified resources in over 200 global regions. Please use caution, and if you decide to access information outside of the app, it may endanger you, especially if you have shared devices with your abuser. The reason is they may be able to see your web browser history. The Trauma Mamas app, it's called Trauma Mamas. This app is available on Google Play and the App Store. And that is traumamamas.app/links. And I will include the link to the app in the show notes. We suggest listening to the podcast all the way through so you don't skip any important steps. In order to make it easier for you to go back to the safety plans that you want to re-listen to, I've included timestamps at the end of the podcast and in the show notes so you can quickly access them again. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today, we have Amy and Emily on the podcast. Amy is an advocate for the city of Mesa and Emily for the town of Gilbert. And they also collaborate with Winged Hope Advocacy Center, which, as Karen and I do work a lot with them as well. So we'd just like to welcome you to the show, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us.
So we just wanted to talk to our listeners for a moment and just let you know this is important information, very educational, to use it if it doesn't apply to you, to just use it as a safe resource for others if needed.
Hi, this is Karen W., and today we'll be talking about creating a safety plan. The following suggestions do not apply to every survivor in every situation. Each plan is so unique to each individual. There is no one-size-fits-all plan for everyone. These are general guidelines for safety plans, so please use what will apply in your situation. Multiple safety planning resources have been used to create this podcast, including the Domestic Violence Hotline, the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, to name a few.
Okay, first we want to give a safety alert. We want you to make sure that your phone and computer you're using are in a safe location and it's not being monitored by your partner. Make sure all passwords are secure and safe. You may delete this podcast immediately after listening, and if it has been sent to you, you can access it again by going back into the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
If you believe it is not safe for you to enter information into the computer or write down anything on paper, you can listen to this safety plan and think about you. If your computer and passwords are safe, you can create your safety plan at www.thehotline.org. We'll have a link to that, a long one. You can click on the link in the show notes.
And if you're in danger, call 911 immediately.
So what exactly is a safety plan?
Yeah, a safety plan is a set of actions that can help lower your risk by being hurt by your partner. RAINN states that safety planning is about brainstorming ways to stay safe that might also reduce the risk of future harm. It can include planning for future crises, considering your options, and making decisions about your next steps. It includes information specific to you and your life that will increase your safety at home, school, and other places that you may go on a daily basis. Safety plans can help you anticipate the dangers that you may face. Just as abusers continually shift their tactics of power and control, your safety plan is an adaptable tool to help increase your safety in your ever-changing situation.
All right, now we're going to talk about when to use a safety plan. Amy, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, of course. I think a safety plan can be used in a number of situations, but it's really taking a moment of clarity to plan for emergencies instead of having to navigate that in the crisis of the moment. So thinking in advance makes it easier to act in emergencies. So a safety plan can be made in a variety of situations for dealing with an emergency, such as when you are threatened with physical abuse or an assault has occurred, for continuing to live with or date a partner who has been abusive, or for protecting yourself after you've ended a relationship with an abusive partner. In my work as an advocate, I've encountered survivors in many different stages of their journey. Some are planning on leaving for the first time. Some are seeking resources after months or years of incessant stalking, and others are navigating family court systems with their abusers, and some of them still live with their abuser. So I often ask victims and survivors that I work with to really reflect on what does safety feel like for them, and really reflect on that in a moment of clarity and not in a moment of crisis. And thinking about what's the worst that can happen. Because if you plan for that, when you have the resources to collect and prepare for those, then you'll be prepared for them in the moment of the emergency.
Yeah, that's good. And Emily, did you want to go over the dangers?
Yeah, absolutely. Something to keep in mind if you're planning to leave your abuser or your partner or have already left, being aware that abusers often escalate their violence during times of separation can increase risk of harm, including serious and/or life-threatening emergencies or injuries. Making a separation safety plan can really help reduce the risk to you and your children if you have children. So like Amy's talking about, that's such an incredibly great way to put it, thinking through the different pieces of steps that you can take as you're thinking about a separation safety plan, and having those ideas ahead of time so that when you hit the point where you have a crisis situation, you're able to execute those steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, just making sure you're thinking everything through.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how do you make a safety plan, Amy?
So like we mentioned before, everybody's scenario is so different. For some people, that means actually putting pen to paper and saying, okay, if this worst case scenario happens, this is what I'm going to do. For me, one of the first steps I would recommend is identifying who your safety and support network is. Do you have friends and family that you trust that you could go to in an emergent situation? And really identifying those people. And if it's safe to write it down, because for some people it is safe and for others it's not. So again, reflecting on what is the safest for you. But at the very first step is to maybe identify the people in your community, in your support circles, who you trust, who you can disclose information to, who you can maybe share important documents with, that you could give items of clothing and safety items, orders of protection. Identifying who those key people are in your life will be one of the very first steps.
Yeah.
So if you need help really starting that process, the domestic violence hotline is an excellent resource to start. So if you're really doing this for the first time and you just kind of want to get a document, they have things that you can download, actual physical pieces of paper that are like, who are these people in my life? And it'll have a blank line where you can write down those people. What are their phone numbers? And it can really help you to navigate point by point by point. What are some really important things to identify and write down?
Yeah, I went on the domestic violence hotline and went through the list of questions and added that to this podcast. So yeah, if your computer's safe, it is a great resource.
Yeah, certainly. So it can be really helpful to meet with someone in your community. So the national hotline is really great, but sometimes it can be really helpful to meet with someone in person to help connect you to some organizations in your local community. There's domestic violence support agencies throughout the Phoenix Valley, throughout the nation. And especially if relocation is the safest thing for you, connecting with someone locally who can open those doors physically and metaphorically can be really helpful. So if it's safe to do so, you can hop online and you can Google domestic violence support organizations in my community or near me for someone who's being tracked online or stalked online, or who has spyware maybe installed on their computer. Googling or using your computer to look up those resources may not be safe for you. Maybe using a different device or something that you know hasn't been compromised by your abuser.
So like they could go to the library or use like some other computer.
Yep, doing a factory reset on your phone, going to a library, using a friend or trusted person's device to look up those resources, or connecting with a local nonprofit organization, a domestic violence support organization, to help connect you to those resources. For example, that's something that Winged Hope Family Advocacy Foundation could certainly help you to do.
Yeah.
Right. They have an office where you can go into the office. So
Yeah, Emily, did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other great things about the National Domestic Hotline, their website's really user-friendly. And if you don't want to have a physical piece of paper, but you'd like to fill out the categories and maybe have it emailed to yourself or just get a chance to look at what that summary consists of, you can log onto their website and do an entire safety plan in their website. And at the end, it will give you the option to email it to yourself if you'd like to keep a copy in a safe email address, a work email address, a school one, something that the abuser might not have access to, or you can close out of it and they don't save any of your information. So that's an excellent resource.
Yeah. And then did you want to talk about the emergency size pocket contact card, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. So my organization makes these and gives them out to people and they can utilize them however they want to. It's got some great contact information as far as local agencies, crisis numbers, national hotlines, but they can also put their personal phone numbers so that they can keep them with them at all times if it's safe to do so. Or they could keep that emergency sized pocket card someplace safe at a friend's house, a desk at work, so that everything's really handy in case they find the need to reach out to any of those resources.
Yeah, that's so important. Now, the first question when I went on the DV hotline asked me was, have you told someone in your family about your relationship? Before we start, I think you did mention this a little bit, Amy. How important is this before we start the safety planning?
Yeah, I went to an advocacy conference recently where a woman was speaking about how she had been abused and she was fleeing her abuser for over 10 years. And she had disclosed that the more and more people who knew what she was going through, the more safe she felt. Because if you feel comfortable disclosing what you're going through to your trusted family members, safety support groups, they can help to call in violations of order of protection on your behalf. They can help to keep you safe. They might be a physical safe house, a safe place for you to go if you need to flee in a moment of crisis. So identifying those people in your life is really, really helpful. And again, being able to disclose that can be very helpful and cathartic too from an emotional standpoint. Going through this type of violence and abuse can be very isolating. So if you can connect with people that you trust, if it's friends and family members, great. If not, maybe again, reaching out to those community agencies to see if you can get connected with a support group, to meet with others who know what you're going through, because it can be a very isolating experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amy, so I know there's different types of safety plans. What are the most frequent safety plans that you encounter?
So in my work, I'm a prosecution-based advocate, and usually by the time someone comes to meet with me, things have either escalated to the point of someone being criminally charged for violence, or people are seeking the assistance of a court order to help to keep them safe, like a protective order. And so I see a number of different scenarios, but we go over safety planning for people who are planning on leaving for the first time, safety plans for people who are planning on staying. Sometimes I work with people on safety plans for reaching out to law enforcement. You could safety plan around that too. Some people that I work with are really surprised to hear that you can text 9-1-1. So if you're in a scenario where you don't feel safe picking up the phone to call someone because it might alert the person who is going to hurt you that you're calling law enforcement, you can text them. And one of the most important things to text them, if you do plan on using that, is to text them the address that you are located. So 9-1-1 and text the address that you're located, and police officers can and will respond. So safety planning for reaching out to law enforcement, safety planning for getting an order of protection, and after orders of protection are served and how to enforce them. Safety plans for stalking, for harassment, for relocation, and then safety plans for people who are navigating the family court system. There's a lot of folks who still share children with their abusers. And so court dates, safety planning around anniversaries and things that might be triggering in the relationship, safety planning around those dates can be really helpful.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Amy. So now let's discuss safety planning during an explosive incident. Emily, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about safety planning during an explosive incident, we just want to think through steps ahead to make sure that we are cognizant of areas that will be the safest for us in the buildings that we're in. So going to an area that has an exit, many people think going to a bathroom or something that has a door that closes and locks might be the best fit. But going to an area that has an exit, windows or doors, Not a bathroom with hard surfaces or a kitchen with knives or other weapons is an important thing to consider. So you'll want to look at the layout of your home or areas that you visit frequently for an exit plan. Staying in a room with a phone, so calling 911, a friend or a neighbor if possible, informing them if there are any weapons in the home just for your safety and other people's safety. And finding neighbors that you can tell about the violence and ask if they can call the police if they hear a disturbance can be a great component to safety planning. Knowing your escape route, so practicing how to get out of your home safely, you and your children if you have children. Visualizing what that escape route looks like, identifying like which door, stairwell, or elevator offers the quickest way out of the home, and taking time to practice your route and having some alternatives can be really helpful as you're navigating that as well. Having a packed bag ready can be really helpful. So like Amy stated earlier, you can leave that with a friend or family member or trusted neighbor, or you can have it ready someplace in your home. You can do this with a backup phone as well. Any phone, typically, whether or not they're connected to service, will call 911, regardless of whether or not they're currently active. So having a flip phone that you keep a limited amount of minutes on, or something that's like an old phone hidden with your packed bag can be very helpful, so you can notify law enforcement if your main phone is broken or taken away. And then in an emergency, if you need to get out right away, don't worry about gathering those things. It's really helpful to have them and have them set aside ahead of time so that you can make sure they're ready to grab and go. Devising a code word or a signal that you can share with children's family members, neighbors, so you can communicate to them that you may need police assistance or that you're starting your safety plan can be very helpful. And knowing where you're going. So having a plan that if you have to leave home or have to leave someplace quickly, even if you don't think you might need to, having that plan ahead of time so that you can directly put that in action can be really helpful for your safety. In moments of crisis, it's hard for us to have that executive functioning and be able to make decisions quickly. Having those decisions already laid out in front of us and having the pieces of the process put in place makes it really easy to execute those more so than if we were making the decisions in real time as we go. So there's other tips like you could keep a habit of backing into the driveway with your vehicle so you can pull out quickly, having a full tank of gas, keeping your car keys in the same place, so a key hook or a dish where you know that you can easily grab them, and making sure your driver's side door is unlocked if it's safe to do so in your neighborhood are steps that you can take to make a quick escape. Also, we often talk about this, but trust your judgment. Anything that you feel will keep you safe and give you time to figure out what's next can be really important in these situations. Trusting your judgment, trusting your gut, and having that feeling of this is, things are escalating. This is a good time for me to step away can help you stay safe in those situations as well. So you have the right to protect yourself if you're in danger. No one deserves to be threatened or injured. And so we talk a lot with safety planning about none of this is your fault. It's never your fault if someone does those things to you. And safety planning is all about that degree of separation so you can move forward in safe ways.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Emily.
Yeah.
Amy, did you want to go over a few more helpful guidelines?
Yeah, sure. I think especially when you're safety planning about leaving, it might be helpful to consider leaving when your abuser would least expect it. This will give you more time to get away before your abuser realizes that you're gone. If you have time to call police before leaving, you can ask the police to escort you out of your house when you leave. When you call them, you can ask for a civil standby, ask them to stand by while you gather your things. You can also ask them to be on call while you're leaving in case you need help. Not all police precincts will help you in these ways, but you may want to ask local police department if that's something that they can do for you. And, it's always better to just ask. We don't know the answer to that question unless we ask, right? And so I work with a lot of victims whose abusers are in custody, maybe after an explosive incident. And so safety planning around those scenarios where maybe leaving while they're in custody, where you know that they're not going to be released for a certain duration of time. And then also if you're planning, if an order of protection is part of your safety plan, maybe get that while the defendant's in custody because they can hopefully be served while they're in custody. So keeping all of those things in mind can be really helpful. You can find neighbors, you can tell about the violence and ask if they can call the police on your behalf if they hear a disturbance. And then also if you're getting that order of protection, giving a copy to your neighbors so that they can call in violations on your behalf. You can hide an extra set of keys in a place that you can get to easily in case your abuser takes the car keys to prevent you from leaving. If you need help in a public place, you can shout loudly, you could yell something alerting like fire. People respond more quickly to someone yelling fire than to any other cry of help.
Okay, so here's the domestic violence hotline questions. Did you want to go over some of those questions that I ask on the hotline so they can be prepared? Amy?
Yeah, sure. So when you're being screened, when you call the domestic violence hotline or even just the local shelter hotlines here in Arizona, they might ask you, who could you call or text to let them know where you're going with your partner? So again, friends or family members, someone that you trust who might be able to call 911 on your behalf if you let them know where you're going to be, and maybe texting that safe word to your friends so they can call 911 on your behalf and they know exactly where you're going. If you decide to end your relationship, where can you do it safely? So safety planning around locations too, maybe doing it in a public place. I work with a lot of victims who are doing like child exchanges in the parking lot of PD so that they know that they're always under a light and they're always under like 24-hour surveillance. So if you are going to leave a relationship, just making sure that you're around a community member or a safe place where you can get to help and who you can talk with afterwards, like having a support group, or maybe if counseling or therapy sounds like a good option for you, being able to talk through what you're going through, because this, again, can be a very isolating experience and a very difficult and challenging experience. So being able to talk through some of what you're going through can be really helpful, healing, and cathartic in many ways. If you can, always have a phone where you know you can get to it. Know the numbers to call, such as 911 or the National Domestic Hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE. So that's 1-800-799-7233. Know your local battered women's shelter. If you can, call a domestic violence hotline from time to time to discuss your options and to talk to someone who understands you, even if you feel that you're not ready to leave.
And this is all such good information.
Yeah.
So now that we've gone over safety planning in an explosive incident, if this applies to you, think about how you would answer the following questions to create your safety plan. So Emily, if you wanted to kind of go over those, this kind of fill in the blank ones.
Absolutely. So there's some fill in the blank questions here that are great for us to think about ahead. So if I decide to leave, I will blank first. What would be the first steps that I would take if I'm making that decision? I can keep a bag ready and put it where so I can leave quickly. I can tell blank about the violence and have him call the police when the violence erupts. So navigating and selecting people that are a good support system and a good community for me so that we can have that system in place. I can teach my children, if I have children, to use the telephone to call 911 for the police and fire departments. I will use this word, this code word, blank, for my children, friends, or family. And it means that I'm asking them to call 911 for help. And you could have different words for different groups of people. You could have a word that's developmentally and age appropriate for your children and something else that you use with your family and friends. That's something you can decide for your support network. If I have to leave my home, I will go blank. So be prepared. Even if you think you will never have to leave, it's a good idea to have those places in your mind. If you do have to leave at some point, you've got options. I can teach safety strategies and escape plans to my children. When an argument erupts, I will move to a safer room, such as blank, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, avoiding places with weapons or rooms that don't have exits like windows or doors. I will use my instincts, intuition, and judgment, and I will protect my children and myself until we're out of danger. If I'm injured or in pain, I will go to the emergency room or urgent care center to have my injuries medically documented and photographed in case I need this evidence later. And I can keep copies and turn them over to the police or authorities of any injuries as well. In the state of Arizona and quite a few other states in the United States, there are agencies as well that are called family advocacy centers or child advocacy centers. If you experience things like a strangulation or sexual assault, they are able to do forensic nurse exams to assist with injuries and medical documentation from a forensic standpoint. And so those are typically run by nonprofits, but some are collaborations with police departments. And so you can go to an FAC and request to be helped and have your injuries documented and photographed. If you go to a family advocacy center, you can interact with a victim advocate and the forensic nurse staff, and you can let them know whether or not you're ready to disclose to law enforcement. If it's a mandated reporting situation with a child, or if it's a crime that's been committed, they will be required to mandate a report. However, if it's an adult sexual assault, 18 and up, that is something that can be decided by the victim and survivor if they'd like to move forward and complete a report. So if you ever have questions about that, you can connect with advocacy centers and ask, and they're able to help give guidance and navigate those.
And if I can just add that if reporting to law enforcement a sexual assault or an strangulation does feel like something that the survivor wants to move forward with, then timeframes can be really important to take into consideration. Usually those types of things need to be reported within 5 business days for strangulation and within, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but 48 to 72 hours for a sexual assault.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's typically 120, the max, but 48 to 72 is preferred. And something else to keep in mind, and that's an excellent point as far as timelines, but keeping track of clothes, things that are difficult to talk about sometimes are like not brushing our teeth or eating food, not taking a drink of water, because there might be DNA somewhere on our clothing or our bodies that can aid in an investigation. And so people can make that initial report, provide any evidence, DNA evidence, have those photographs taken, and then choose to move forward with that case in the future if that's something that feels comfortable to them and something that they want to do. But if we lose the ability to collect evidence, in some cases, it's very difficult to move forward on the justice side of things with prosecuting a case.
That's just great information. Thank you so much, both of you. Now we're going to move on to if you need to leave your house quickly, which items would you need to take with you?
So cell phone and charger, if you have a cell phone.
Identification, obviously super important. I work with a lot of people. I am bilingual, and so I work with a lot of Spanish speakers. And so like immigration documents and legal documents can become really important as well.
House keys, car keys, safety deposit keys, if you have those, your work keys, so you can still seamlessly report to work if you're able to go in. It's great to keep those in a secondary safe location. So that's another thing you could leave with your support network or a neighbor if it's not safe to store an extra set at your house.
Address books, phone cards, medications are crucial. Ask your doctor about getting a set that you can keep in a separate location at a friend's house, something like that. Health insurance cards, cash, ATM cards, checkbooks, bank books.
If you choose to get an order of protection, or in some jurisdictions, it's called a restraining order, keeping a copy of that with you in the items that you can take quickly or providing that to your support network can be great for you to have on hand. Any family court matters like divorce, separation, custody, or family court papers, so you can provide those and continue to work those cases. And then lease, rental agreements, or house deeds can be really important as you're navigating family court if you have that, or any sort of divorce and separation. It also can come into play if you are pursuing a restraining order or an order of protection. There are items that you can request with the judge, typically in jurisdictions, things like exclusive use of the property. And so in order to request those things, you would need to be able to show that you're on the lease or that you've been living there for a certain amount of time and have rights as a tenant, or if it's your home. So those are great things to have that you can show if you need to.
I think it's also really important to note that a piece of paper should never prohibit someone from leaving an unsafe environment either, especially with a lot of the folks that I work with in the Spanish-speaking community where their abusers are using their legal documents as a way to manipulate or control them. I really encourage those folks to get in touch with a community-based organization who might be able to put you in touch with some free or low-cost legal representation, because you can always get new copies of those documents. So they should never prohibit you from leaving an unsafe situation. They're helpful to have. If you have access to them, great. But if you don't have access to your lease document, or if you don't have access to a copy of your order of protection, by all means, go, and we can circle back and get copies of those on the back end.
That is a really great point. A lot of times isolation tactics are used, or manipulation tactics by abusers. And I've worked with people that their birth certificate and their social security card was burned, so they can't get a future job, or the children's birth certificates are taken away and they are misled to believe that means they won't be able to have temporary custody or long-term custody of their children. And so connecting with people that can get you set up with legal advocacy resources is critical sometimes. That's a really great point, Amy.
For sure. And if you can, in your bag that you're taking with you quickly, you can keep like keepsakes or jewelry, sentimental items. Again, if you can have access to those things, great. If not, your safety is and should be always your first priority. Personalized safety plans, you can bring those with you, copies of financial documents, and a list of the credit cards you hold by yourself or with the abuser.
Yeah, and something else that can be really helpful to have, and there's lots of ways to do this, but any evidence you've been collecting to show that you've been abused, financial, emotional, psychological, physical. I've worked with victims that will take pictures and text those pictures to a trusted friend, or have an email account that's not their main email account, which will show time and date stamps and injuries over time. And so when they feel ready, if they feel ready to report the abuse to law enforcement, they have documentation that can really aid in an investigation and in prosecution. So those can be really helpful tactics to use as you're navigating those situations.
Yeah. And sometimes when you're being threatened by text message or someone's leaving threatening or harming voice messages, sometimes our first impulse is like, oh, that's so terrible. I just want to delete it. But if reporting to law enforcement is something that you want to do, they can be really helpful to retain and to show to an officer or to a judge.
Yeah, such good information for people to just have in their head. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and start discussing safety when preparing to leave. So Amy, if you kind of want to go over some of those.
Yeah, I think a physical location is one of the most important things to consider, is having a safe place to stay. So make sure that it's a safe place that can protect you and your children, and plan who to stay with or who would be able to lend you money during a crisis. So if you have, again, that trusted network of support people, great. And if not, then there are shelters. There are local community-based organizations that can help to get you connected with a shelter. So just making sure that you have a warm and safe place to stay at night. Once you do have a safe place to stay and a safe place to maybe make some phone calls, call a domestic violence victim service program and find out which services and other shelters might be available as options if you need them. Keep their addresses and phone numbers close at all times. Anywhere that you're keeping those other safe items, just tuck those phone numbers and contacts away in there too. Finding someone that you can trust, leaving the money with them, leaving extra keys and copies of your important documents with them so that you have access to this quickly if you need to flee. Opening a savings account. A lot of abusers are using finances as a way to manipulate and control people. And so being able to open a saving account that you and only you have access to, so that you can rely on that when you're navigating, independently of that relationship. Gather important documents and identification cards, children's immunization cards, marriage licenses, divorce decrees, birth certificates. I know we've already covered a lot of that, but just kind of reiterating. If you have concerns about your immigration status, you may qualify under the Law of Violence Against Women Act, people call it VAWA, and talk to an immigration expert. Many victims of crime may be eligible for certain visa remedies for legal residency in the United States. So connecting with a domestic violence support organization and then being able to connect to those legal services will be really helpful. Review your safety plan and study and check your plans as often as possible in order to know the safest way to leave. Leaving can be the most dangerous time. So it's really important to acknowledge that. And that's why at the beginning of this, I said, maybe consider what is the worst that can happen. And I don't ever mention that as a way to scare someone, but it is important in a moment of clarity to really plan for what is the worst that can happen. Has this person ever threatened me with a firearm? Have they ever threatened to take my life? And if that is the worst possible scenario, let's plan for that so that we know how to keep ourselves safe.
Well, now that we've gone over safety planning and preparing to leave, if this does apply to you, just think about how you'd answer the following questions. Emily?
Yeah. Where would I leave money and an extra set of keys? Who would I leave that with? Where would I keep important documents, an extra house key, extra car keys? Would I open a savings account? And if so, setting a goal that's very specific, like I will do so by this date to increase my independence, can be really helpful so that you can target that goal. Also thinking about things that you can do to increase your independence. So making a list of other things that I could personally do to increase my independence are blank. I would make sure to include the domestic violence hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE, to keep with me or keep it someplace safe so that I can call in a crisis. Having a shelter hotline available in the state of Arizona, we have a couple of general shelter hotlines that if you call into one of them, they assist and do the legwork to check where there's openings at shelters around the state. And then they'll let you know what's available and you can keep calling in if there's not space the first time that you call them. So those are extremely helpful. And they have shelter hotlines across the United States. Keeping a cell phone with me at all times or having a extra cell phone available. If I know if I use a telephone credit card, the following month, the telephone bill will tell my abuser who I called after I left. And so just being thoughtful of any sort of tech or tracking ability with the safety measures that we're taking can be really helpful. I'll check with people in my life to know who can let me stay with them or lend me money if I leave. Can keep extra clothes for myself and children. I will review my safety plan in order to plan the safest route and review that plan with somebody, a friend, a counselor, an advocate. It's important to review these in your mind frequently if you think that you might be preparing to leave. So again, it's more of an auto response once you put that plan into motion. And depending on the development ages of your children, having them practice more frequently and calling it things like a fire drill or a safety drill on how to get out of your home or apartment quickly and safely can be really helpful in case you need to move fast when something happens. And rehearsing that escape plan, practicing it myself and my children can be really helpful. If I leave, something to consider is whether or not it's safe to stay with families and friends that the abuser knows about, and if it would be safer to look into an abuse shelter or a secret place that that person does not know about. It can be really helpful to talk that through with an advocate or someone that can give you professional advice that frequently discusses safety plans. And also, you can include other addresses in an order of protection or a restraining order. There are different rules in different jurisdictions, but it's great to look over that information. So if you choose to stay with a friend or family member, you could potentially include their address on that order of protection as a protected address. And you can request the judge consider that your children be included on an order of protection. Depends on jurisdiction if they're able to. Anyone that's 18 and over does have to get their own order of protection or injunction against harassment. So that does come up often for adults with adult children or family members that are also concerned for safety to assist people. Those are some things to keep in mind as well.
Okay. So yeah, again, good information. So how can the victim create a safety plan at home once the abuser is no longer living in the house to protect and provide additional safety in their home?
Yeah, for sure. As we talked about already, this can be one of the most volatile times in a relationship. And so some really important safety planning measures can be to change the locks. So if the abuser still has access to a pair of keys, then making sure to get the locks changed as soon as possible, fortifying any window locks, getting all of those secured as soon as possible, replacing wooden doors with maybe the steel security doors. Security cameras can be one of the most effective safety planning measures survivors that I work with can implement, especially if you're considering getting an order of protection and you're calling law enforcement to say, hey, my abuser, he's come back, he's here right now. By the time law enforcement arrives, he may have fled already. Having security cameras will not only help to keep you safe, to know when somebody is around your home, around the back, around the windows, but they can also help law enforcement to hold that person accountable because now they don't need his side of the story because they have actual physical evidence that he was there by implementing the security camera. So security cameras can be super effective and super helpful in keeping you safe. You can purchase fire escapes, ladders in case you have to get out quickly from a second story window, smoke detectors, fire extinguishers for each floor of your home. Install motion detectors and lighting systems that light up when someone approaches the home. That can be really helpful for your security cameras too, because if you don't get a good image of their face, then it really helps to have the lighting. You can teach your children how to use the phone and how to call friends and family. Obviously, making sure that they know how to call 911 would be critical, and especially if the person that you are trying to flee from is trying to take them from you. So this is where getting that order of protection, exclusive access to the home, and going to family court, making sure that your children are protected parties if that's something that you can do. Understanding that if the defendant or the abuser that you're getting a protective order against is the legal father, that sometimes family court will have to take into consideration certain things, and they may not be able to include the children as protected parties, especially if there hasn't been an act of violence that has occurred against the children. But still safety planning around that, making sure that if you do have an order of protection and the children are listed as protected parties, that you're giving a copy of that order of protection to the children's school, to the children's daycare, to the friends and family members that might be providing daycare for the children. I will tell people who care for my children the names of those persons who have permission to pick up my children, and that my partner is not allowed to pick them up. So making sure that that is crystal clear to anyone who is providing care for your child, any organization and any friend or family member that might be providing care to your child. Informing daycares, babysitters, Sunday schools, teachers, all of the above. You can tell people that your partner no longer lives with you and that they should call police if they see him around. Maybe even give them a copy of your order of protection because they can call in violations on your behalf when you're not even home. Sharing it with neighbors, church leaders, friends, others. Consider getting a dog. Maybe they would help you to feel more safe. Change your phone number, screen your calls, block using blocking and caller ID. Provide on-site property manager or your trusted neighbors with a picture of the defendant. This can be really helpful for work too. If you work at an organization that has security on staff, maybe bringing a picture of your abuser and saying, hey, I have an order of protection against this person, and if he comes looking for me here, please call 911 right away. This is what he looks like. And they can post it. If you feel comfortable disclosing what you're going through with the people that you work with, again, the more people who know what you're going through, the safer you may be.
And oftentimes find that funding for items like this, like security cameras, changing locks, is challenging for people. There's often a lot of financial abuse tied in with other types of abuse. And so if funding is an issue for you and you still think that these would be things that contribute to your safety, please reach out to any victim advocate. A government-based advocate, such as a court advocate or a police advocate, will be able to point you in the right direction for a nonprofit. And nonprofits directly are typically able to assist with funding or resourcing to get items on this list taken care of with you.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
So now we're going to discuss all safety planning regarding an order of protection, like our restraining order. Did you want to get into that, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting a protective order can be an important part of safety planning when preparing to leave. Even if you get a protective order, it's really important still look at other safety planning steps to keep you and your children safe. We talk about this often as it's just a piece of paper, which sounds like a negative way to frame an order of protection. And we don't mean it to be negative or mean it to be scary. We just want to really help people understand that it's a legal tool in our toolbox. It's a way to hold abusers accountable if they continue to contact in violation of a protection order, but it doesn't offer any sort of physical safety. It's not changing a lock or setting up a security camera. So it's one tool in your toolbox as you're looking at a complete safety plan. A legal protective order is not always enough to keep you safe. And you can locate in your state under the restraining order section of many different websites, including the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, to look at information of how to get a restraining order in your jurisdiction. And while a restraining order might not necessarily keep you safe, it can help, especially if an abuser thinks that they have a reputation to protect, they respect or fear that the police may arrest them, or they have a fear of going to jail. But it can also have a counter effect. It can make the abuser angrier and more dangerous, especially if there's a criminal history, that person's unemployed, already stalking someone, or not afraid of police ramifications such as an investigation or going to jail. So it's really important to talk that through with your community or your advocate and weigh those decisions as you move forward. It's a very helpful tool, but it's not a good fit for every situation. And then moving forward, if the restraining order or the order of protection is violated, if the abuser contacts you and that's not allowed, or has firearms and that's not allowed, or shows up at a protected address, police are able to arrest that person for violating the court order. And that can be a separate charge each time that it's reported and investigated. And if I don't have a restraining order, I can go through the family court system. And this question comes up for people a lot. Can go through the family court system to try to find other ways for protection of children. This is a great place to get some legal advice as well. Most victim advocates have lots of information on safety planning and a good overview of the criminal justice system, but no victim advocates are able to give legal advice. And so when it starts getting to the point of civil matters or family court, it can be really helpful to have a legal advice, legal resource so that they can talk through things like temporary custody, how to file those types of paperwork with different courts, and can be very helpful moving forward.
For more information on orders of protection or restraining orders, please listen to podcast number 115, Creating a Safety Plan, Orders of Protection. All right, so now we'll go over safety in public and your place of employment. Emily, did you want to go over that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about this to some extent, but telling somebody, if you're comfortable, you can decide at work to inform people of your situation, especially if you have an order of protection, to provide that to the office security, supervisors, coworkers. Providing a picture of the abuser if possible so they can visually identify that person can be helpful. And it's your right to request and accept confidentiality to those that you disclose to. Screening your calls, having someone screen your calls if that's a possibility, or even logging your telephone calls if possible so that you can show time and date stamps. Again, that's just documentation if there's any violations or safety issues. And then making a safety plan specific to the workplace, how you enter and leave, your routes driving back and forth to work, having someone escort you to your vehicle or transportation if that feels safer to you. If you work in the same place, discussing this with your supervisor what options you may have regarding scheduling, safety precautions, employer family benefits can be helpful. And places of employment may seek to obtain an injunction against workplace harassment against the abuser to assist in your safety, as well as the safety of other employees. Again, that depends on the jurisdiction and the state that you're in, but you can definitely connect with an advocate or look that up online to see if a workplace injunction against harassment is something that's possible, and then communicate with your team at work to discuss those types of things. If you have an order of protection, again, it's really great to keep that with you at all times if you're able to. Informing building and security workers and coworkers that you trust of your situation can be really valuable.
Yeah, this is really good information. I mean, it's just good to know all this.
Yeah.
And so now that we've covered safety in public and work, if this pertains to your situation, how can you answer the following? Do you want to go over those, Amy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just going to put myself in this scenario. I can tell my boss and security and staff about what I'm going through, maybe even providing a picture of my abuser, giving them a description of his car so that if they see him pull into the parking lot, they can call law enforcement, or at the very least, let me know so that I can call law enforcement. I can ask my friends and colleagues, my boss, to help screen my phone calls, maybe using like the front desk reception number instead of my direct line, so that when somebody calls in asking for me, they can say, hey, can you tell me who's calling? And if it is that person, kind of having a little bit of time to prepare and report if I want to. If I use public transportation, or if I'm walking to and from my car, I'm always going to take a route that is well lit, maybe parking under a light or a security camera. If I work in a public place that does have access to like security surveillance and things like that. If the defendant knows me so well that they know where I shop and they know where I go to the mall and they know where I go to get coffee, maybe shaking that routine up a little bit. If the defendant shows up anywhere that they are not supposed to be, or it seems like a total coincidence, in my experience, it's not a coincidence, and that might alert you to the fact that they might be tracking you, maybe with a GPS device or something like that. Yeah. So maybe taking your car to a professional detailer and having it looked over. There are support organizations that can help you with that as well if it's cost prohibitive. There's organizations that can help you to pay to have your car professionally detailed and checked to make sure that there's not a tracking device. If you do find a tracking device, do not touch it. Call law enforcement right away. If you touch it or remove it, that can really compromise the accountability of that really dangerous behavior. We want to make sure that defendants are held accountable for that. So don't touch it. Just call 911 right away, because it is against the law for someone to surveil you or track you or monitor your location without your consent. I would certainly avoid any place the defendant may know, maybe mix up my routine a little bit until things maybe are calmer or de-escalate. If you need to avoid seeing your partner on your way from work or class, what route can you take? Thinking about that in advance would be really helpful. Is there a different route? And if not, maybe making sure that you have somebody who can walk with you if that's possible. Maybe staying on the phone with someone when you walk home, just so, and letting them know where you are. Right? So, hey, there's nobody available to walk with me right now, but I'm just going to call my mom or my whoever that safe person is in my trusted network of supporters, let them know where I am, where I'm going, and who to call if I don't make it to where I should be going safely. If you need to leave immediately, if you were stranded and you need a ride home, whom can you call? Again, like thinking about those people in advance, this is the very first step in your safety plan, is to acknowledge who those people are. For me, for example, it would be my mom or someone that knows my routine so intimately that they know exactly where I am, where to find me, and where I should be going.
Emily, did you want to talk a little bit about having a pet?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have pets and you're worried about their safety and welfare, you can use resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They have an animal and family violence section where you can look at suggestions, as well as the Animal Welfare Institute. They have a webpage with that. But talking about safety planning with pets, and you can even include pets on protection orders. Oftentimes abusers will threaten or even injure pets as a way to manipulate situations with their victims and survivors. And that can be really scary because pets are family members for people. That can be incredibly challenging. If an abuser says, if you leave, I'm going to kill the dog, or if you leave, I will give your cat away. That can be terrifying for a survivor. And so reaching out to agencies, there's a bunch in the United States, depending on your state, there's things like Red Rover. There's a bunch of different places that are able to either temporarily shelter your pet while you seek shelter or a safe place someplace else. Or there are even some agencies that are able to shelter you and your family, including your pets, in the same place. They typically have longer waiting lists, and so sometimes it's challenging to seek out those opportunities, but definitely connecting with area resources, shelter hotlines, or advocates can help you assess what's an opportunity in your area to assist you in keeping your pet safe as you move through your safety planning.
Yeah, I know I had heard that there are some organizations that, also can house your pet, which is great
Yeah.
to know that, because
Yeah,
you think about.
there's the Sojourner Center in Arizona has a cat run and a dog run. And when I went to tour, they said that they've had a parrot and an iguana and a few other things over there that they've taken care of to make sure that people had good opportunities to keep their pets safe. So it's a great question to ask when you call the shelter hotline if you decide to go that route, or if you have a friend that's like, yes, you can live with me. I'd love to be your support network, but I am terribly allergic to cats. So we've got to figure out a different game plan. It's a good secondary thing to have available as your safety planning in total.
Yeah. And just thinking that through. So now switching gears a little bit. So many times alcohol and drugs are involved. What are some ways that we can safety plan regarding that? Because I know that's got to be very important.
Amy?
Yeah, I think, again, being as clear-minded and safe as you can be. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend drinking or using any kind of substance if you're creating a safety plan. I'm not sure if this is more geared towards fleeing an unsafe situation where someone else might be using drugs or alcohol, but if you are going to use those things that might impact your response times or your judgment, to make sure that you're doing it in a safe place with people that you know and trust. And
I think a lot of times drugs and alcohol are involved either on either end. Like, you may want to lean towards drinking because the situation is so horrible. You want to disassociate with alcohol.
Sure.
Drugs.
And I think it's really important to acknowledge, I work with a lot of folks who say, he's not this way when he's sober. He's like the best person I've ever met, and he's not this way when he's sober. And something that I've mentioned, and it applies to my life personally as well, that, it's okay to have compassion for someone who's struggling with something as serious as addiction, but never at the compromise of your own safety and your own wellness. So It is totally okay to set a healthy boundary and say, hey, you're not a safe person for me to be around when you're drinking. And so when you are drinking, I will always put up these safe and healthy boundaries. I will get an order of protection, and I will have to hold you accountable for your very dangerous behavior. And if they continue to violate that boundary, then that's really telling about their behavior. So again, it's okay to have compassion for someone who's struggling with something like substance abuse, but not at the compromise of your own safety and wellness and what brings you happiness and joy.
Yeah.
I also talk a lot with people about the fact that drug or alcohol use or mental health or other things that we have compassion for, like Amy's discussing, and domestic violence are a very separate thing. Oftentimes people are like, well, if they go to alcohol counseling, the domestic violence will automatically stop. And so having conversations around violent tendencies and domestic violence is a completely separate cycle and something that needs very specific counseling or learning and behavior changes on behalf of the abuser that they're responsible for on their side. It's sometimes difficult for people to separate and think about, but it's a very important step, something to make sure that you keep in the front of your mind as you move forward in these situations.
Yeah, thank you for that. Emily, what are some of the steps that they can take to help protect their children?
Absolutely. Teaching developmentally appropriate safety strategies to your children, like talking about dialing 911, being able to contact police and fire departments, or how to talk to a safe neighbor for help. If they're old enough and they're able to memorize it, making sure that they know your address and are able to tell that to safe adults. Telling your children's caretakers who has permission to pick them up, and make sure that those caretakers know how to recognize those people. If they have photos of them, or if they identify, if they ask for a driver's license before they allow people to pick them up, just see what their protocols are. Giving the people that take care of your children copies of any custody or protective orders, as well as any emergency numbers. So if they're not able to reach you, who else, family member or friend that's a trusted adult, is able to take care of your children. You can also consider having a power of attorney over minor children in case you are detained or separated from your children. Possible power of attorneys might include a friend or trusted family member, and that's something you could speak with a legal specialist or legal advocate about. Who could watch your children if you need childcare in an emergency? And where is a safe place that your children could go if they're in danger? Are two really good questions to ask yourself and have some planning around.
Yeah, that was from the DV hotline, those two questions.
And if you plan on taking your children with you, if you choose to leave, generally best to talk to a lawyer who specializes in domestic violence and custody issues before you make any decisions and before you move forward on any action plan to make sure you're not in danger of violating any court custody orders or any criminal parental laws, including kidnapping laws in your jurisdiction. It's especially true if you want to leave the state with your children. And so it's a really great idea to look at resources in the National Domestic Violence Hotline or ACES DV in Arizona, or speak to an advocate to discuss what legal resource centers are available, if there are lawyers that could assist with interstate custody matters for victims of abuse, or even within your own state. Sometimes they can provide legal information or even like referrals to pro bono attorneys so that you can make sure that as you're coming up with your safety plan, you're not violating any laws.
Yes, very, very good information. So now we're going to talk about what are some steps for technology safety. So yeah, we definitely live in a technology age. So this is definitely something that's important to talk about as well.
Yeah,
Amy?
of course. This has been something that's been occurring a lot, and I'm encountering a lot of victims recently about technology safety planning, because we use technology every single day. We have our smartphones with us literally everywhere we go. And if that smartphone or that device has been compromised, then it can be disclosing our location to our abuser in every single moment, 24/7. So yeah, I've been working with a lot of survivors on this lately. And if abusers are using smartphones or Google Voice or obscured internet-based numbers to harass you, then it can be really difficult to hold them accountable, because when they're calling, it's not their number, it's a Google-based number or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that can be really, really difficult for victims, because even when they're calling law enforcement and officers are saying, well, hey, I don't know who's making this call because it's coming from a blocked number, there's not a whole lot that they can do about it. One of the most empowering things that you can do, and if it is safe for you to do, is to change your number. And I know we mentioned before, like not disclosing your number to anyone who would disclose it to the defendant. I've worked with victims who have been called by the defendant hundreds of times a day, sometimes more than that. Literally just every single minute of the day is incessant contact. And so one of the most empowering things that you can do is remove their power by just changing your number. I know that's not really an option for everyone. Sometimes we have to keep our number because we have kids and schools and doctor's appointments and this, that, and the other thing that prohibit us from changing our number easily, but it might be an avenue for some. For those who can't change their number, just making a stalking log. I've worked with victims who said, my ex has been calling me hundreds of times a day for years, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from law enforcement now because I'm calling them every single day. If you can make a log and just maybe you're calling law enforcement once a week to say, hey, I'm going to report that the defendant called me 10 times a day, every single day this week. And I'm going to make a point to call you every single week to let you know that it's still happening. And so hopefully the severity of consequences for that person would only escalate as it continues to happen. So just knowing that there are options, changing your number if it's a good fit for you, and then just blocking every single unknown or unsafe number that might come through on your end. If the defendant has ever had access to your device, then it might be a good idea to factory reset your phone or your tablet or your computer to its factory settings so that it would remove any type of spyware or something that they could have installed without your knowledge, that they could be using to track your emails, your correspondence, your locations. Social media is something that a lot of us use every single day as well. So making sure to disable your location on social media. So like a lot of us are checking in on Facebook. Hey, I'm out with friends in downtown, wherever. You're actively posting that information in somewhere that someone can easily access it. So if you're in an unsafe situation that you're trying to maybe not share all of that information as publicly, turn off your location on your Google, on your Instagram, on your Facebook. I know it's super fun to sometimes like post where you are, but not if it's putting you at any type of risk. Disable your locations. And
because the first thing you want to make sure is their passwords and that the abuser doesn't have all that, right?
Right. So if you've ever shared your password with them, or if they've ever had access to your device, they can install spyware that can recognize your keystrokes, right? So maybe you've never disclosed your password to them, but they know it anyways. And how would they know that? Because they've installed spyware on your computer that'll track your keystrokes. And so something that we're entering multiple times a day, every single day, are things like passwords and social security numbers and things like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
For more information on technology safety, listen to podcast number 113, Creating a Safety Plan, the Importance of Safe Technology. All right. So the last thing we're going to talk about in the safety planning is your emotional health. You have to safety plan for that. Amy, did you want to talk about the importance of this?
I think it's something that is so often not prioritized because when you're in an emergent crisis situation, really the most important thing is your physical safety, right? But our emotional safety and our mental health is also super important. So when it is safe to do so, it's important to take time to reflect on the things that bring you joy and bring you happiness and connecting with people who you might be able to share what you're going through with. But it's not always easy to disclose what you're going through with someone you're really close with, like your family or your coworkers. Maybe that's something that you would prefer not to wear on your sleeve. So making sure to touch base with a mental health provider or a licensed therapist where you have an opportunity to kind of express how difficult what you're going through is critical. It's very isolating. And so being able to connect with people who know what you're going through and might have some recommendations for how to get back to things that bring you joy. And journaling can be really helpful, writing things down, just expressing and venting, and spending time with the people that you love and bring you joy, going for walks, getting a little bit of fresh air can be really helpful.
I think if you've not worked outside the home in a significant amount of time or recently, you worry about your ability to support yourself or your family. Trying to get job skills by taking classes at a community college or a vocational school if you can really help you get a job before or after you leave so you're not financially dependent on the abuser. Yeah, it's such valuable information because we see so many financial abuse situations where someone might be ready in a lot of other capacities, but finances are really challenging and holding that person back from being able to make some decisions that they want to. So being able to network, work on resumes, lots of places have free classes for that, like libraries and local colleges. So just seeking out resources and opportunities to be able to get from point A to point B on a goal is really great. For example, in Arizona, the Burton Barr Library in downtown Phoenix has a College Depot Center, and they'll allow anybody to do like drop-in classes to apply for financial aid, learn how to work on your resume. They have scholarships available, and they have a website that they've built where they have hundreds, sometimes thousands of scholarships listed, and you can just scroll through and see what you'd be eligible to apply for. And there's a ton of resources like this all across Arizona, all across the United States. So just asking questions and being cognizant of like, there's so many ways that you can seek out help and seek out wonderful opportunities. We have to ask and network and put that goal forward.
Yeah. And I think getting back to the emotional part, I think it's really important to just like you said the entire time, like Amy said at the beginning, just recognizing who can help you if you're feeling down, who can help you emotionally if you're feeling depressed, like just making sure that you know that these feelings, you are going to need other people, you're going to need support. And so just to know that emotional side of it as well. Anything you can make yourself do to feel stronger, like whether it's books or whatever that person does. So, and then how do you feel about if the abuser goes to a batter's program? It may not necessarily make them safer. Do you guys have any comments on that?
So I work in a court or a prosecutor's office that has recently implemented a domestic violence court. And one of the things that the judge says in domestic violence court, it really moved me because one of the minimum sentencing guidelines on a lot of these domestic violence charges is to take domestic violence intervention classes. And really taking a class isn't always necessarily going to change a person. And so it's really, really important to reflect on the actions of that person. So taking the class alone doesn't necessarily change a person's behavior. So take the old ways of like putting your money where your mouth is. Like I really need to see the change in behavior before I can accept or acknowledge that this is improving their behavior at all. So the most important things that they look out for in domestic violence court is, did the defendant finish their classes, but also have they picked up any new charges? And so if they have, then that's a pretty clear indicator that the classes are not working. And for some people, they don't, especially when we're working with like the narcissistic personality types where this isn't my fault. This isn't my fault. I will never take accountability for my actions. And so just really looking for the actionable behavior from people who you're letting into your close circle of partners and friends and family members, just looking for the action and not just the, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Did they actually do it? And did they actually learn something from it?
Well, I'd like what it says too about I will base all my decisions about my future and my children's future on this one thing alone, our safety. I will ask myself before I do anything, will this action promote my long-term happiness and be in my long-term best interests? I will not make any major decisions based on what others think or on guilt that I may feel. And I just think it's important to say that, especially people that may go to church or whatever. There's just that feeling of, well, I can't do this. My pastor wouldn't approve or, something like that. It's really important just to remember your safety is the number one priority and the safety of your kids.
Yeah. And I will remember that the abuse that I've experienced is not my fault and that I did not deserve it. I remind myself that I have a right to be happy and safe and that my children deserve to be happy and safe too.
Yeah. So is there any other important information that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I have something as far as emotional safety and looking at your emotions as you're moving forward. In my experience, we talk a lot with victims and survivors about justice and healing being two separate, sometimes parallel paths. It's really hard sometimes to kind of wrap your head around, especially when you're in the beginning steps in safety planning. But keeping in mind that the justice system never moves as quickly as we'd like to. And there's a lot of old legislation and there's a lot of old rules in place. And those of us that work in this field try to update them and make positive changes. But the system's not where we would like it to be. I think we could probably all agree by and large that's a pretty common statement. Mm-hmm. Your healing journey can really be completely separate from the justice journey. You're getting set up with support, with friends and family in the community, support groups, counseling, resources, and moving forward in ways that are happy and healthy and bring you joy can be a very separate track. And so keeping in mind that how you're doing doesn't have to tie in to that other person's choices or behaviors. It can be a very emotionally healthy perspective. And sometimes we need reminders to have those healthy boundaries and think about things from that angle, but that can be really helpful for people. And then I completely agree with you. I think it's really important to just continue to say, and I always offer to the survivors and victims that I work with, if you need to call me or want to have this conversation, I will say this as many times as it's helpful and healing for you. Abuse is never your fault. The person who's causing the harm is responsible for their own choices, behaviors, and consequences. And I am always here to support you and care about you and how you move forward. And so that's always an open invitation with anyone that I work with.
Yes, absolutely. It's very important for them because usually they're made to feel like it's their fault or something. So that's very important to stress.
Yeah. Right. Love should never hurt, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.
Yes, absolutely.
We just wanted to add in, one of our listeners recommended the Hope app by CAMH for safety. They keep it on their phone to help them with suicidal ideations. We just wanted to let you know about this resource. Yeah, thank you both so much for coming on to the podcast. Where can someone find you if they wanted to reach out, or who can they contact to get started on their safety plan?
I think if you live locally, the best thing to do is to just Google domestic violence support organizations in your area. I'm personally located at the Mesa Municipal Court with Victim Services, and a Google search of City of Mesa Victim Services would lead you to myself or one of my colleagues, all who are very capable of starting a safety plan with you.
Great.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. Lots of community-based organizations are great, and if it's safe for you to Google them, that's a good place to start. Amy's department is incredible. We collaborate quite often, and I appreciate them. Most court systems and police departments have advocates embedded that are able to assist. And if someone wanted to reach me personally, I am with the Gilbert Police Department. You could call our non-emergency line. Also, something you can Google, but it's 480-503-6500 and request a referral to Victim Services, and they'd be able to get you over to us as well.
Okay. And then anyone like outside of Arizona, they can just Google, like domestic violence hotline. We've already given that number, but they can Google any of those services.
Yeah. And I really like that the domestic violence hotline is a really easy acronym to remember. So in a moment of crisis, just remember 1-800-799-SAFE would be able to.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for coming on to the podcast.
Yes. Thank you so much, Amy and Emily.
This is going to be really a good, helpful baseline for people to have. Like, this is going to be great.
I can't agree more. I thought the same thing. And I think Brenda and I actually talked about that. I was like, I cannot wait to be able to incorporate this into my outreach to victims. And I'm sending them emails all the time that say, hey, here's a couple of resources that we talked about. And, I gave you a lot of information and it's overwhelming. Yeah. So when you have the time to digest this information, you'll have it in your back pocket or whatever. To be able to equip them with something like this where, they can take a deep dive if they want, or they can just list the quick, most important essential things. It's going to be really helpful, really empowering. So that's why I cannot thank you enough. This is going to help us in our safety planning discussions with the people that we work with.
For quicker and easier access to review each safety plan, The timestamps are as follows. Safety planning in an explosive incident. Timestamp 13 minutes 54 seconds. Safety planning if you need to leave your house quickly, what items you would need to take with you. 25 minutes 27 seconds. Safety planning when preparing to leave. 29 minutes and 54 seconds. Safety plan at home when the abuser no longer lives there. 35 minutes 27 seconds. Safety plan with an order of protection. 39 minutes 46 seconds. Safety plan in public and place of employment. 42 minutes 40 seconds. Safety plan with having a pet. 47 minutes 30 seconds. Safety plan involving alcohol and drugs. 49 minutes 27 seconds. Safety plan protecting your children. 52 minutes and 6 seconds. Safety plan regarding technology. 54 minutes and 3 seconds. Safety plan for emotional health. 58 minutes and 37 seconds. Thank you so much for listening, and we just appreciate all of our listeners.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.